point is very much about interpretation of what weird means. And I'm sure now with hundreds of experts of weirdness in order to give a sort of chop of this is not weird. What does it mean? We have to make a cube? Okay, this is just exactly going into the direction of real estate value. There are some other samples in history of heads of regimes that was interested in architecture. It was Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, these people, they had a very clear idea what the architecture should be. I love the Stalin architecture in Russia. I think there is a sort of greatness in this kind of architecture, but it can be very dangerous for a politician to get into this field. I like more what he said about art and architecture in the same statement. Then he said art and architecture should be at service of the people, targeting harmony, and I like this because this can open new possibilities to reinterpretation of tradition. But when you say no to the weird building, is very, very dangerous, because what weird means, someone who interpreted it, and this can be dangerous for creativity, can be a limit for creativity. I have some problem in considering China as a market, somehow reducing the universe that is China. First of all, in terms of culture. I went to China the first time in 2008. That was probably the climax of the certain kind of open time for China to the world, with the Olympics first and then with the Expo 2 years later. For me it was a great meeting with an extraordinary culture. It's totally wrong to imagine Western architects who's coming to China to make some experiments and then come back to Europe. Totally wrong. The Chinese people want to have this building. Otherwise, they put the money, not the architect. Then they approve the projects. Not only them, also the planning bureau of the city. Then this building is the result of the willing of Chinese people, first of all. They wanted to have something special, not ordinary. Otherwise, the building would be totally different. It's very important to understand. Responsibility for me, of course, is not to come to China to make the same thing I did in. From this point of view, I can understand some upset which is now going on in China for some buildings that I consider fantastic and extraordinary buildings, like CCTV or Zaha with Three Hills, residential building. But I can understand because maybe they're missing a sort of cultural translation or cultural metabolization. But on the other hand, they are specific symbols of this moment of China, historical moment of China, the global China, in terms of his technological development, his social development. He's willing to become a sort of benchmark, a worldwide benchmark for every field, including architecture. First of all, I didn't build anything. It was a Chinese person who built, not me. And I didn't went in China to build a giant building. It's very important to understand that the willing of build a building is not something which just belongs to the architect. It belongs to the client. Without this client, this building would not probably exist nowadays. And without this client and his desires, this building will not be like the building is nowadays. Then it will be different. Look at the color, for instance. I designed this building with another color, not with this gold color. And the gold color was a willing of client. The client wanted to have this symbol of gold, not very much as a symbol of richness, because gold is a very important element in Feng Shui tradition. That was the willing just to give a shape, to give a form to some desires, and desire starts from Chinese. This building is just an attempt to take an element which is probably the earliest physical document of Chinese civilization, which is the B disc, the J disc. Try to make of this element a symbol for a building. It can seem maybe too easy, but actually it's very deep. It's a very deep process. It's been very, in my opinion, well designed. If you see my architecture before go to China, it was different from the period after I went to China. I don't think I misguide the Chinese client. I think the opposite way. Chinese culture and Chinese clients and their willing of greatness, of something which can stand in centuries, was changing me very much, my approach to architecture. Of course, I didn't stop to be myself, but I maybe understood something about myself I didn't know before to meet China, to meet Chinese client. There are buildings which are much bigger than my building, much bigger. My building only 145 meters tall, and at the moment in China, I think the tallest building is 600, no, maybe even more. My building is a small building, I can say, in terms of dimension. But it's very interesting how the people remind this building as big. Myself, not very much. But when I feel influenced because I find this a sort of limit in proposing something which is going toward reinterpretation of traditions. For instance, I won a competition for 75,000 inhabitant new city near Tianjin, proposing a totally different model of urbanization based on tradition, based on the court, based on the inner space, like intimate, and the outside space of the court, like public. And I won the competition. They was very happy, but after I arrived somebody from Tianjin, an officer from Tianjin said, no, this is not possible, this is something totally wrong. And of course they are now developing something which is always the same thing. Some blocks, roads, some green, and then blocks, skyscrapers, and so on. I think it's a tragedy. It's a total tragedy. Culture is always moving on, always. In Italian, also in English, the word original, I'm very fascinated with this word, because original means something new, but at the same time, in the word is included origin, which is something old, the source, the ancient source. Innovation is exactly to do something which was old, become something new. I think China has a different approach to innovation because they have a culture of replica. I always say that the Temple of Heavenly Harmony, I think this is the name, in Forbidden City, which is the biggest temple, has been rebuilt 7 times. First time in, I think, 15th century, Ming Dynasty, replicating something that was before in Yuan Dynasty, and then it was fired 7 times and rebuilt 7 times, always the same. Always the same. The last time was in the second half of 17th century. If you consider the history of architecture in Europe from the end of 15th century to the end of 17th century, you can see maybe 6 or 7 different styles, because in Europe the willing was to make new everything all the times. And in China they rebuilt always the same. Something which was born replicating something that was existing before. We are very much affected by the concept of person, the individual. Chinese culture is very much affected by the idea of the world people, which is an heritage of Confucianism philosophy. Confucianism was a philosophy, not a religion, and this is affecting very much nowadays society, where they refuse the individual. Also for creativity, they like to say, we create this. Chinese Pavilion Expo has no author. It was a team who created this, but a team without a single person. I'm sure there is a person who had the idea. Chinese culture is almost afraid to put one individual in front of the others. And this has a limit. We have a limit because maybe we are too much extreme individuals. But on the other side, it's very dangerous to be too much extreme in communitarism, eliminating the concept of individual, the concept of the person. I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I don't know, nobody knows, what's going to happen in the future. But what I can feel is a strong tension in China at the moment. On one hand, there is a huge heritage of cultural tradition, and on the other hand, there is a present situation that is the result of 20 or 30 years of totally erasing every track, every remind of tradition. I've seen urban design master plans in every part of China, with hundreds of these, always the same, with green and blocks and skyscrapers. This is not Chinese tradition, of urban tradition. This is maybe American. I visited 23 cities in China, not only the great cities, also the second level city and third level city. And also in the third level cities, when I'm speaking about 5 million people cities, their dream was to become like New York. I think this is totally wrong, because I can understand for Shanghai maybe to a reference, even if I think it's wrong, because China should find his own model of global city, not just copy American models. But what about a city like Guilin, for instance, or a city like Wuhan? Why they should copy New York? Why they should not go and find in their tradition something that can become global and universal? I think it's much more interesting than just copy someone else. The more I study Chinese culture, the history and so on, different dynasties, different philosophy linked to every dynasties, and more I feel urgent to do something to realize this reinterpretation.